Good morning, Phoenix, and welcome to the House of Mystery radio show. And this is the place You are back in the House of Mystery on KFNX Phoenix. Today we're talking about Dillinger, John Dillinger. Now, for the younger listeners, you might not know who that is, but you're going to find out. And joining us to talk about the life and death of America's first celebrity criminal is Dary Matera. Thank you for joining me on the show.
No problem, Alan.
Wow. So, first of all, let's talk about you. How did you get into writing about John Dillinger?
There was a massive 2,000-page manuscript that some researchers had done, and they came to my agent in New York, and it was, a brilliant document, but was all a mess and wasn't really something people could read. So they came to me and they said, take this document and turn it into a 350-page book. And that's what I did.
Wow. Now, did you were you interested in those type of gangsters and people in that format?
My career has kind of been to and out. Every 2 years, I become something new. I've been a gangster, I've been an attorney, I've been a cop, I've been everything. So it's just what came to me at the time. I have done a lot of true crime. I wrote some mafia books. I wrote some political books. I did the Arizona Scam book with Joe Stadino back in 1992 when he bribed like 20 of our politicians for casino gambling. So I kind of jump around. It fit what I did to an extent, but I had not gone that far back in time and done a period piece before that one. I haven't done one since either. Well, I did a 70s book with an FBI agent, but haven't done a period piece like that before or after.
How did you find finding out information? Was the research tougher to do on something that happened quite a while ago?
No. This book was an absolute gift from heaven. As I mentioned, there were two real studious researchers who had worked on it for 50 years. The book was full of interviews with people, live interviews with associates of John Dillinger and all the gangsters of that era and their wives, and most of them were dead. I couldn't even confirm everything, but it was all there in this 2,000-page manuscript that was pure gold. So all I had to do was read through it, take out the most exciting, interesting, sexy, tawdry, bullets, blood, bank robberies part, and put it together. And I mean, the detail was just fantastic. They knew every move of every bank robbery he ever did, every civilian walking by, every bullet where it hit in the store down the street. It was just amazing, the research.
Wow, that's pretty lucky. To get that information.
Oh yeah, and I'm, researching isn't my strong suit. I don't like to bury myself in a library. I'm kind of a real fast writer. Let's rock and roll and write and whiz. So that was so good. I could have never produced. Nobody could have produced anything like that, starting from scratch. I mean, all the people are dead.
Yeah.
And this thing was a gold mine. These guys worked on it for 50 years.
Wow, that's incredible. So when you started doing this and reading this, you must have had some idea who Dillinger was. Were you surprised at some of the things you learned? Like, was there quite a difference in what you thought Dillinger was to what he really was?
Yeah, for the younger listeners, we haven't really defined him. John Dillinger was the most famous and notorious of the 1930s era bank robbers, the Depression-era bank robbers, right when media was coming out. And he was very famous. Others were like Babyface Nelson, Pretty Boy Floyd. They all had these funny nicknames. And Bonnie and Clyde, some people may have seen the movie with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. So during that era, and it was all started because of the invention of the automobile. That's what spurred this on, because now you could rob a bank, jump in a car, drive 90 miles an hour. That's where that expression used to be a popular expression. He was going 90 miles an hour. Well, that was based on the bank robbers of the 30s. That was the top speed of the cars as they were being built. So it was a wild time, like the Old West, because cars, and they could escape jurisdictions. You rob a bank and you escape the city jurisdiction in 2 minutes. You escape the county in 5, and the state in sometimes 20. And that's why John Dillinger helped create the FBI, but we can go on and on. There's so many things that happened, but it was a very wild, exciting time. And the public hated banks because the banks were failing and stealing everybody's money. So basically, the public was cheering these bank robbers on and making them out to be heroes.
Well, it seemed to be that way. I was going to say that not only Dillinger, but like you mentioned, Bonnie and Clyde. Why were they kind of popular with the public? Like, what made them so sought after in a way? They were like celebrities, and why? Because they were.
Yeah, they were. The title of my book, John Dillinger, the First Celebrity Criminal, is real because he was as big as a movie star, and Dillinger was a very handsome man. He looked like Clark Gable and the actors of the time. So the public was just enraptured with him. And the reasons were, like I said, it was the Depression, and the banks had become the enemies. They were closing. So nobody was worried about the bankers. The bankers were actually stealing money from everybody, and there were some stories that they hired John Dillinger to rob their bank so they could cover up their embezzlement. So the public hated them. And also, you got to remember, there was no television at the time. They just had radio, which could embellish anything as entertainment. There really wasn't a lot of entertainment. It was the heyday of newspapers, and it was the heyday of radio, and they would feed off of exciting stories. And these bank robbers, like Pretty Boy Floyd and Babyface Nelson and John Dillinger, all these guys became the big stars and celebrities of the media at the time.
So how many banks did he rob? Do we know?
He robbed John Dillinger's era, surprisingly enough, for being so famous, was only about a little more than a year. So he robbed probably a dozen banks. He was given credit for banks he didn't rob. I mean, if crooks could dress up like John Dillinger, rob a bank, and blame it on Dillinger, they thought they could get away scot-free. So there's probably 20 that were credited to him, and only maybe 12, a dozen, that he really did.
Now, this was happening in Chicago, right?
Well, no. He remember what I said about the automobiles.
Right.
This isn't Jesse James and the previous star outlaws like Billy the Kid and Jesse James. They were very provincial because they had no transportation except a horse or their feet. So their area was limited. John Dillinger was going coast to coast. He went as far as up in the Dakotas, and he went into Florida. He went to Tucson. He was here in Arizona. He was everywhere because 90 miles an hour in those cars could take you anywhere.
That must have been pretty exciting for them. I mean, to go all of a sudden in cars that were going 90, that was like a huge change.
Yeah, if you're a young guy and that's your full of adrenaline like he was. I mean, the movie on John Dillinger that was the pirate actor who did it. His name, the guy plays Captain Sparrow.
Oh,
there's a big movie.
Yeah. That's I know who you mean, Johnny Depp.
I took his name, Johnny Depp. Yeah, Johnny Depp played the Dillinger movie, and one of the lines that I kind of made up for the book that they used in the movie was John Dillinger was about 5 things. He was about guns, money, women, fast cars, and I always forget the fifth, but there were 5 and they used it right in the movie, right out of the book. But yeah, he was a young guy, and he loved those cars. And the thing about it is he used them almost like Kleenexes. They were so cheap at the time, and when you're robbing banks, the money's fast. He would buy a car out of a showroom, the fastest, most innovative car. Think of it today, he'd go get a Ferrari right off the showroom floor, rob a bank, and leave it at the end of town.
Wow.
All these beautiful classic cars, mostly terraplanes, and all the best in the world, and he'd usually abandon them. In the midst of the robbery, he'd have 2 of them. He'd hide an old truck somewhere, drop the beautiful terraplane off 5 miles out of town, and that would be it. So they were only like $1,000.
Oh, I was going to say, was he making that much money? I guess he was.
The cars, you could buy a car for $300 off the assembly line, a Model T in those days, $350, $400. That's all, and he was getting sometimes 50, 60 grand out of these robberies. So the cars, you buy a $1,500 terraplane that could go 90 miles an hour, and the wheels were huge back then. If you think of the old cars, they had the big wheels. One of the robberies, he had yellow wheels. And you think of John. I know you want to be cool when you want to be on the news, but you could spot that from a helicopter if they had them back then. Big, bright yellow wheels, and everybody in town said, "Oh yeah, John Dillinger robbed a bank with giant yellow wheel tires." But he abandoned the car again.
Yeah, it didn't matter. Oh, so what do we know about him as a person? Where did he grow up? Did he have a good life? Was he from a good family, money, educated?
Yeah, John Dillinger was a typical, he grew up in Indiana, small town south of Indianapolis, Indiana. He was a farm boy. His father was a salt-of-the-earth farmer. The problem with John Dillinger is his mom died when he was 3 of some ailment, pneumonia or some flu, or back then it was tough. So his mother died when he was age 3, and that kind of sent him spinning. He didn't have that strong maternal influence. His dad was out trying to grind a living out in the fields all day, so he kind of ran wild. He was a typical rambunctious guy. He was a really good baseball player. He wanted to be a professional baseball player, but he was a little too wild, got in trouble in his late teens for robbing the local hardware store, and went to jail for 10 years. They gave him a 10-year sentence for, he didn't even have a weapon. He just strong-arm robbery of the local hardware store owner, and the judge gave him a 10-year sentence, which embittered him. So when he came out, that's when he became the person we know as John Dillinger.
And so, why is it that the FBI and everybody was so? Why was he so sought after? What made him stick out from other criminals?
Well, first of all, there was no FBI at the time. So J. Edgar Hoover, who would later, he had a little bitty federal group to chase white-collar criminals called the DI. I think it's whatever it stood for. It was called the DI. So FBI, Hoover had to go to Congress to enable the creation of the FBI. And at the time, there was with states' rights, and people feared a federal police force. They thought we'd be with the jackboots and the Nazis, and the federal police force was thought to be unnecessary and an evil thing. And Hoover went to Congress, talked about the invention of the automobile, and used John Dillinger specifically as his tool to create his FBI empire. He went there and said, look at this guy. He's robbing a bank in South Dakota, and within an hour, he's in Arizona. How are you going to catch these guys unless we have a federal police force that can cross the borders and can chase them state to state, like Smokey and the Bandit, like Jackie Gleason did illegally? And think of Smokey and the Bandit, the Burt Reynolds movie where the Jackie Gleason chased them. Well, you couldn't do that. You couldn't even do it in a city limits. So they needed that at the time. So Hoover used John Dillinger. John Dillinger was Hoover's Frankenstein. so he could create the FBI, and Congress passed it. And even enabled his officers, his DI officers, could not carry weapons. So Hoover went to Congress and said, we need to carry weapons. Babyface Nelson and Pretty Boy Floyd had machine guns. John Dillinger was using 50-shot machine guns, and his FBI agents were unarmed. So that was a terrible imbalance. And Babyface Nelson killed 3 of them in one little spat in the 30s. So that's how Hoover rode that to get his empire, build his empire.
Really? So he kind of used them. And that, well, I guess that was probably embarrassing for him as well, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, they hated the fact that they were becoming celebrities. That's a good point you bring up. Not only was it the technology of the time, it's that the public was rooting for these guys. And the last thing you want is for the public to root for the bad guys in any society. You have to nip that in the bud. And as we'll get to how they actually dealt with John Dillinger, you'll see how important it was to stop those radio shows, stop those newspaper headlines, stop all the excitement John Dillinger was creating. Because if the police couldn't, they couldn't stop Bonnie and Clyde, and couldn't stop John Dillinger, and couldn't stop Babyface Nelson, society breaks down. Too many people copy them.
Yeah, they become who you want to, who public idolizes too. Did he have a big group, John Dillinger? Did he have a big kind of like Bonnie and Clyde and stuff, a gang of people?
Yeah, he had an interchangeable gang. It started during his prison sentence. Remember, he went to prison as a teenager with a horrifically too big a sentence. The judge hated him and gave him a bad sentence, this poor kid. So he spent 10 years in prison with all the other famous gangsters, and he ended up getting the Illinois prison, and the Chicago prison was Al Capone's era, and it was the era of other notorious gangsters. So he befriended all these guys, and in fact, he broke 10 of them out. So when John Dillinger was released because he was young, he promised the guys in prison who took care of him that he'd break them out, and he staged what remains the biggest jailbreak in Illinois in the early 1930s. He broke out 10 of his friends by having a gun shipped in with the cotton bales that they used to make shirts in the prison factory. So he was pretty innovative, and he got his guys out, and they formed this Dillinger gang. And they just rampaged interchangeably. Some of them were shot, some got killed in the robberies. But he had a gang of about 10 main guys. Babyface Nelson ran with them for a while. They didn't like each other, but because Babyface was a maniac. John wanted to be suave, kind of debonair. He was really nice. He didn't kill anybody during the bank robberies. He treated the hostages really nice. He would take a lot of hostages, usually pretty women, and he'd just kind of flirt with them and laugh, and then go out on the outside of town, sign an autograph, and go on his way. But Babyface Nelson was a nasty little short guy complex who wanted to shoot places up. Some of the women John Dillinger kidnapped became well-known models afterward. He made their career. That's how famous and how the things were at that time. You got kidnapped by John Dillinger, it was your golden ticket to a modeling career.
Oh, well, there you go. That's
yeah, if you're an actress, if you're like the Lindsay Lohans of the world, you're just waiting at banks to get kidnapped to resurrect your career. You're suddenly the most fan. You're posing in the outfit. You know, the media. What dress were you wearing? Well, here's what I was wearing, and then she dolls up into something else, and boom, new modeling career.
Well, now we know the secret. We're giving it away.
Yeah, and he was very nice, and they always spoke well of him. So that's how his legend grew. The women would always say, "Well, he was really nice, and I sat on his lap in the car, and he flirted and gave me a couple of $100 and apologized." You know, and that endeared John Dillinger to the public.
Oh yeah, it must have. Now, and there's also, of course, about the rumor about him. He was supposed to be having a supersized,
Yeah, that's one of the most famous things. You asked me earlier if I'd ever heard of John Dillinger. Well, when I was growing up in the 60s, the only thing I ever heard about John Dillinger is he had this enormous elephant schlong, or whatever the radio can say. And that's one of the most famous legends of John Dillinger, that not only was he, I guess if you have huevos of steel, that was the impression of him, and he went in and robbed those banks and walked through police bullets and all that. So it became that he was extremely well endowed. And how that came about was, after we can get into later how he was finally brought down, but his autopsy and laying in wake became a public show. If you can imagine back then how entertainment was so twisted, that his body laying in wait, 20,000 people lined up to walk by his dead body. And it wasn't even in a coffin. It was kind of displayed on a thing. And because the railing of think of a medical, like what you use to wheel people into hospitals, it had railings on the side. And one of the rails was right there next to his midsection. And the way the media took the picture, it looked like he had this giant tent pole there. And I think the picture's in my book, or you can look it up online. The picture's online. You just look up John Dillinger, enormous, whatever you want to call it, and you'll see the picture online, and it looks like he's got this giant tent pole. And everybody, ooh, no wonder he was so man of steel.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and what there's the story about it being in a jar in the Smithsonian Institute too, right? So
yeah, and then it was such a phenomena, and he was such a character. They said that they put his sex organ in a jar at the Smithsonian for the world to see, like little girls are marching into the Smithsonian and seeing that. How illogical that was. Yeah. But the irony of the story is, his brain was taken out and is missing and is in a jar somewhere. And no one has been able to find it to this day. I don't know what happened. It decayed, or maybe the jar cracked or something, but they did, in fact, that's a true story. They did, in fact, take out his brain.
Why did they take his brain, but why would they take that out?
Well, during an autopsy, you take a brain out, and he was shot in the head, so the doctor would have had to take the brain out to study exactly when he died and how he died and do his report. So I don't know if you watch crime shows, but doctors are always.
I sort of mean, like, why would they actually put it in the Smithsonian, or why would they keep it?
Oh, well, once the doctor takes it out, then he's thinking he's probably a low-paid ghoul down in some Chicago mortuary, and everybody's playing an angle back then. It's the Depression. People are, who knows, the doctor may have been losing his mortgage or broke or whatever, and he thought, I got John Dillinger's brain. Let me, looking at it in the glass jar and thinking of his kids being hungry, so he managed to capitalize on it. Everything about him, people were capitalizing. And remember, there was a big show of his death, and his body was put on display, and everybody lined up like there was a parade. So, and when he was shot, we can get into that later, but when he was shot, people dipped their clothes and newspapers in his blood on the street.
Wow.
For souvenirs.
So he's like the Pope.
Yeah, so his brain, I mean, if you have a brain, you have any celebrity's brain or body part or hair, you get a lock of Elvis Presley's hair, a little glad bag of it, you could sell that on eBay today for a mint. So anything like that. People are ghouls.
It's just
they'll buy anything.
That's crazy. That's crazy. And so now people, right now with reading, some people, some of the bankers actually had plans, and they set him up. They made him rob their bank for just themselves.
Yeah, but when the banks started failing and everybody was panicking and it was doom and gloom, remember this was the Depression, the worst depression in American history. So everybody was panicky. That's the stories you hear about Wall Street, people jumping out of windows because they lost their money and over a course of an hour they lost their entire fortunes and all that. So people were very scared, and a lot of bankers began embezzling whatever cash they had before the banks failed. And in order to make it the perfect crime and not go to jail, and everybody hated bankers, they would send out word to the gangs like Dillinger gang, you know, come rob our bank, here's where the money is, here's how much you'll get, and like they're working in cahoots with them, and that would cover up their embezzlement.
That's just crazy. And I see the phony gun that Dillinger had for that escape. Let's talk about that escape. So how did he actually get out of prison after he was caught, like when he escaped, the Crown Point?
Yeah, the second most famous thing about John Dillinger after his so-called enormous sex organ was the phony gun he had, and there's many legends about that as there are about the other things. When he went into the Crown Point prison, it was like this, you know, John Dillinger escaped. He was the most famous criminal on the planet, and he escaped jail 3 times. So think of it as if Charles Manson, who we'll get into in another show, got out of jail and escaped after Helter Skelter. That's how big that news was. And one of his most famous was Crown Point Prison in Indiana, where the 3 theories is he carved a gun out of a washboard slat. Young people don't even know what a washboard is unless they've seen a country band of some sort that plays them. But it used to be how they wash clothes. It was built with wood and a little ripply metal. I don't know if you've ever even seen it.
Yeah, you know, I'm old enough. I know that. But
okay.
There's a lot
you know
of
what a washboard. All they think of is washboard, your stomach muscles. Yeah. When you work out, like the situation, you're supposed to go for washboard stomach muscle, whatever they call that muscle.
Yeah.
But that was based on the old washboards, how people washed their clothes before they had washing machines. So Dillinger had one in the prison. They said he carved a gun out of that. Others said he carved it out of soap, but I think that was subsequent. And then that story is his attorney just smuggled a real gun in there. But he used that to get a guard, pin a guard. I don't know, the guard was in front of the cell. He must have panicked because he let Dillinger out. The thing about the gun story, though, is the legend, the cool Hollywood legend is he used this little wooden fake gun to get his way 20 minutes through the entire prison. But the true story is within 30 seconds he had the guard's gun. And then with a couple of minutes he was in the warden's office and he had the warden's machine guns, and that's how he got through the rest of the prison. But it's famous. The gun's worth over $1 million. It's in a museum, I think, in Indiana.
Wow. That's just
You can see it on the internet, too. They probably have pictures of it. It's a half. You know, he did a half gun, the barrel and a little trigger area, and then he could hide the handle in his hand that didn't exist.
That's just
pretty clever. He was a clever guy.
Oh yeah, he must have been. And so now the story of him when he finally did get caught. How did that happen? How did he get killed and caught?
Well, he was caught numerous times. You're talking about the final when he got killed, because he was in prison and he kept escaping. He got caught here in Tucson one time, and it was a massive show in Tucson. The gang came out here to hide, to lay low, and the problem with that is they rolled into Tucson, these city slickers in their big $1,000 cars, which at the time was like a $300,000 car. So they roll into Tucson thinking they're not going to attract any attention, and the whole town goes crazy. They're all, hey, John Dillinger's here. You should see his car. In fact, when he got arrested, they put his car on display the next day at a Ford dealership. They said, John Dillinger drives Ford Fairlane. They actually did that when he was arrested. But him and his gang got arrested in Tucson by the local cops, and then they were in jail, and people were outside the jail like it was the Beatles. And he got his women, they had their girlfriends with them, and they were all arrested. And the female prison, the women's prison back then was so loose that the Dillinger women would be hanging out the windows waving to the crowd. There were all these gun mole type Marilyn Monroe looking women. They'd be waving to the crowds, and the crowds would be screaming and going nuts. It was a crazy time. So they finally shipped him out of town back to Chicago, and then he escapes again. But so he did that a couple of times. He escaped. But the final time, I guess Hoover was embarrassed and shamed, and every time Dillinger was caught and escaped, one of the famous things at Crown Point was he had his arm around the prosecutor. There's a famous picture of Dillinger hugging up to the prosecutor, smiling, and he had his hand in the shape of a gun, you know, your thumb and middle finger, and he had it on the prosecutor's shoulder, like he was telling his gang, somebody smuggled me in a gun. And it destroyed the prosecutor's life. And the prosecutor at the time in Chicago was a famous political guy who was thinking of running for president. But when he posed with John Dillinger, that ruined the rest of his political career.
Yeah, well, I imagine it would, right? So they actually ended up, he was killed, he was shot, right? That's how it ended.
Right. Right, that's another famous legend. It's the famous Lady in Red. Everybody's heard of the Lady in Red. No one knows, half the people don't know what it means anymore. Big hit song in the 70s, too. Lady in Red, British band. But this is the famous Lady in Red that Hoover got tired of being shamed by Dillinger. So they decided that they're not going to arrest him anymore. They're just going to send the hit squad. Now, Dillinger's FBI agents were just a bunch of geeks, accountants, and lawyers who didn't know how to shoot. In fact, they had only gotten maybe months before the right to carry guns, and they didn't know how to use guns. They're like Shaun of the Dead, the Englishman trying to shoot zombies. In Shaun of the Dead, they fired 20 shots with a rifle to kill one zombie.
Yeah.
And they were running out of bullets. Well, that was the FBI back then. They couldn't shoot. So what Hoover did is he hired some military assassins, snipers, temporarily to join the FBI, and he sent them out to hunt down John Dillinger and kill him. And they ended up, the cops in East Chicago, which is not even in Illinois, it's in a bordering state. The Chicago, Illinois, and then East Chicago is in the bordering state. And there were some dirty cops there, and one of them was going with a brothel madam called Anna Sage, and she was going to be deported for being a pimp, and she decided to sell out John Dillinger because she had a connection with him from her brothels. She knew where he and his gang liked to party. So she got with her dirty cop boyfriend, and they made a deal with the government to sell out John Dillinger. And so they knew he was going to go to, they put a woman on him that looked like Billy Franchette, the love of his life, half Native American, dark-haired beauty, that she got busted with him in Tucson and was in prison. So John was all mopey about her. So Anna Sage, being the pimp lady, she thought, aha, get me a look-alike, and I can rule John Dillinger. And that's exactly what they did. They got a woman named Polly who looked just like Anna Sage, and managed to have John Dillinger see her in a bar, and of course he went right to her. He went right for the bait. So now they set him up, and they were going to go to a movie, a Clark Gable movie, in which it mentioned John Dillinger, and they had a newsreel before it about John Dillinger. He's sitting in the audience, and Anna Sage, what gets missed in history in the movies is Polly, his new girlfriend, wasn't the Lady in Red. It was the pimp lady who went with them that day, who kind of walked behind him. And she wasn't even in red. She wore an orange skirt so the cops could see her. So they're supposed to see her walk out with the orange skirt in the theater in Chicago. It's still a landmark there. And they walk out, John and his new girlfriend, after seeing Clark Gable in a movie that had him in a newsreel. He walks out, and the FBI agents who couldn't shoot and the military assassins who couldn't kind of swarmed him. He tried to run, and they just wasted him, shot him in the back of the head and in the front. And the FBI agent shot 2 ladies in the crowd.
Oh.
Because, again, yeah, that's good for a guy. You talk about collateral damage, and today they shot 2 women in the crowd because they were scared to death of John Dillinger and his ginormous sex organ and gun. And so they shoot 2 women in the crowd, just bystanders, but the military assassins got him right in the back of the head. And that was the end of John Dillinger.
Oh,
and everybody scattered. And then the people on the street, when they knew it was John Dillinger, they dipped their clothes in his blood. And the newspapers used to come out real fast. So once it got word that John Dillinger had been killed in Chicago, they had bulldog editions, that's called in the newspaper business, where they can get a newspaper out really fast. And before they cleaned up the scene, the bulldog edition was out. So there'd be a big headline, John Dillinger slain, and they're dipping the newspaper in his blood on the street before they cleaned it up. So that was the end of John Dillinger. He had like a 16-month run as an American celebrity criminal.
Well, it's pretty amazing that it's still popular today. It's still talked about, and it's so many years later, and if it was only that short of a time.
Oh, yeah, this is 1930. That was like a billion years ago. But, like I said, what we talked about earlier, Johnny Depp made the movie, so he revisited that. And the movie Johnny Depp made was supposed to be Public Enemy. It was supposed to be about all the gangsters of the time. But Dillinger was such a well-known character. When Johnny Depp signed on to play Dillinger, he just wiped out all the other guys. They became inconsequential, and they went more to my book than the book that they were supposedly going to base it on.
Yeah.
So they could just focus entirely on John Dillinger.
Yeah.
Hollywood is the same then and now.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You get a big star, and then he takes over the whole movie. And the movie Public Enemies becomes the John Dillinger movie. And they use my book instead of the other authors, but pay him the most.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah, John ripped me from the grave.
Did you like the way it played? Do you like the way the movie has Hollywood's done it?
I liked all the parts they stole from my book.
Yeah.
They were well done and perfect. And like when I said earlier, the 5 points that I emphasized in one section, hearing Johnny Depp say that and say, "Oh, Johnny, the screenwriter, got that right out of my book." And so yeah, I liked all the parts that came out of my book. It was pretty good. It was a decent movie.
Yeah.
It was good enough. Johnny Depp was kind of a little guy. He wouldn't have been my choice. I would have had a more of a Brad Pitt type actor to play him, but he was a big star then, so you go with what you go.
Yeah, you kind of take the flavor of the month, right?
Yeah, Johnny Depp would be more of Babyface Nelson, the crazy little bantam lunatic, screaming, yelling, could channel his crazy into Babyface Nelson. John Dillinger was suave and debonair and more of a Clark Gable type, if anybody remembers him, but calmer.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, you realize I'm just thinking about this. We're getting close to 100 years.
Yeah, it's been a century. Well, these guys the legend only grows. I mean, people know Jesse James to this day. He preceded John Dillinger in fame. Billy the Kid, I just did a television show for America Factor Fiction on the American Heroes channel on Billy the Kid and Jesse James. So those legends stay because movies and TV shows, they just go on and on and on. And if they're not on John Dillinger exactly, they're covering all the elements from what he did. I mean, so many times I'm watching a crime show and I see a scene that was taken out of one of my books, especially a John Dillinger book. How many times have you seen people carve guns in prisons now? How many times have you seen people escape? And, I mean, John Dillinger his life was so fictional. When he escaped Crown Point Prison, he escaped in the sheriff's car. Yeah. He not only carved that gun, but he went into the garage, got in the sheriff's car, and took off in the sheriff's car. And if you saw that on a TV show, you go, come on, that's stretching the truth. I don't believe that. And you go, no, John Dillinger did that. And he did things like that. So these legends, screenwriters, or so many TV shows, they just go back in time and look for details like that. John Dillinger had all kinds of details. And if you read my book, it's like a guide to how to rob a bank. They had every element. They had every element covered. They knew how to do the cars. They threw nails on the freeway behind them to get rid of the chasers and the police. I mean, he was very innovative in robbing banks.
Yeah, and now, so in your book, when you mention it, you've got
it's John Dillinger. What's the tagline? The life and death of America's first celebrity criminal.
Right.
But Dary Matera is my name, D-A-R-Y. If you want to Google me, you can just Google Dary, D-A-R-Y, author. I've written 20 books about everything from Elvis Presley to Charles Manson to political scandals. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to.
That's my plug.
That's good.
My little plug for the publisher. I was just going to
say, yeah, in the book itself. Now, you've also you describe each robbery, shootout, the prison escape. You kind of go through the whole scenario, so people are going to get the full meal deal with this, aren't they?
Yeah, because of the way the researchers researched the book, and I can't take credit for that because that's not my strong suit. But these guys were so exacting. It's just amazing. They break the bank robberies down to minute by minute, who was where, who shot where, what person, civilian was outside, who saw it, where the cops were, who was the first cop. You know, one show some guy was a boxer who tried to be a hero in one of the robberies, and which cops, and how Dillinger, his route out of town and all these smaller towns and cities from the banks, and how they knew the train schedules so they wouldn't be caught by the train. Trains were really big back then. That was the bane of an escaped felon's existence, was having to wait for a train, because that was deadly. So they knew the train schedule, everything. They have, if you like that kind of details in books, it has all that. I tried to make it as interesting as possible, kind of like the show 24, where you have every minute. You remember the TV show 24, where they did 24 hours of a terrorist thing and all that. So there's like half a dozen or more of those kind of robberies, and they're all across the country.
Yeah. No, it's
and including the captures and when he was killed in Chicago by the Biograph Theater and all that stuff, good stuff.
Yeah. Now, did Dillinger, like, the one thing I do, the police made it at the time that a lot of these gangsters, we call them, that like Dillinger and Bonnie and Clyde and stuff, were killers and robbers. But did Dillinger actually really kill anybody during a bank robbery?
That it's kind of confusing whether he did kill anybody. Dillinger tried his best never to kill anybody, and he didn't want to be that kind of guy. He knew public relations, he knew public image, he knew a robbery gone bad where he killed a cop would ruin everything he had done. So he did his best. So the only one that's really credited with him was in a bank robbery in Illinois, in a bigger city. A cop was hiding behind a post. And when Dillinger came out, the cop got the drop on him, shot him 4 times. But Dillinger was wearing a bulletproof vest at the time. So the cop popped Dillinger 4 times in the bulletproof vest, and Dillinger had no option but to shoot the cop, who didn't have a vest, ironically enough. So, yeah, he killed that cop, and he always regretted it. He apologized. He was sad about it, but he said it was him or me. What could he do? Because he didn't expect that cop to pop out from behind a post. That was a massive shootout in that one in Chicago Bank. That was, the cops had him surrounded. It's a miracle how they got out, because somehow the police had them all surrounded, and they ran Hollywood style through the bullets. And Dillinger dragged one of his friends who got shot. He dragged him to an escape car, and that was a bad one. So that was the only credited murder Dillinger had, and happened to be of a police officer, so that didn't help him. That kind of paved the way to the assassination, to Hoover building that assassination team to kill him. And you can imagine that today. In our society today, you can't have an assassination team hunt down a well-known bank robber like that. That would be heard of. And for the agents to be shooting the public during the killing scene, to be just willy-nilly firing bullets into women's legs like they did when they shot Dillinger.
Yeah. Yeah, it would. It would be on 20 people's phones nowadays. It would be all over.
Exactly. And it'd be running 24 hours on the news cycle. All these civilian ladies getting shot by FBI agents, closing their eyes and squeezing guns, shooting in every which way.
Yeah, it wouldn't play well. Were any of these gangsters killers in general? Like, did a lot of people get killed, or did they really rob without doing a lot of killing?
It's individual personalities. Babyface Nelson, who was part of Dillinger's gang, which Dillinger hated, was a total psycho, and he would kill anybody. I mean, Babyface Nelson still to this day has the record of number of FBI agents killed by one person. He's killed 3. So he would kill anybody for any reason. And some of the others were trigger happy and they didn't have a problem, or they were scared, or they'd shoot. Bonnie and Clyde. Clyde Barrow was a little bit of a psycho, so he would shoot people. Pretty Boy Floyd never shot anybody. He was just all pretty, and his machine gun was a prop. So that was, his character was not to hurt anybody at all, and then he had a PR lady girlfriend who just pumped him up as a tough guy and gave people his bullets in bars and got them all thrilled, but he never shot anybody. And Machine Gun Kelly was another one who was a nice guy who never shot anybody. And I think he was the one with the girl who was the PR girl who built his legend. Pretty Boy Floyd and Machine Gun Kelly, they were gangster era. So it went as to the personality, what was eating them, what they were mad about, and how their character was on whether they would kill people during a robbery. And John Dillinger just didn't want to. He was really a nice guy. As I said earlier, I mean, the hostages all loved him. He made them famous. No one ever had a bad word to say about him. He'd let them off at the end of town. He thanked them, shook their hands, gave the women a hug, and took off. And they're like, wow, he was really cool. And now I'm famous, and I can be a model.
Yeah. It's kind of the American way, isn't it?
The American dream, yeah. Get kidnapped by John Dillinger and become a movie star. There you go.
Now, did Dillinger actually have any wife or girlfriend during all this time? Like a regular?
He never got married, and he was a big ladies' man, but he fell in love with Billie Frenchette, Native American woman, kind of came up the hard way through him, was a prostitute for a while, but he really fell for her, and that was his dream girl. And that's basically what got him killed, because they put a look-alike on him in Chicago and lured him into the trap where the military assassins killed him. So, but he didn't get married. He didn't have children, as far as anyone knows. And there's legends that he never died. Of course, with every criminal and every politician and every celebrity, they're all on that island with John Kennedy and Marilyn and Bogart and Elvis. And all them, they're all out on that island. So, of course, there are legends that John Dillinger never died. Which, again, we were talking about what people use in history. What we haven't mentioned is John Dillinger also tried to get his appearance changed. He had a drunk, disbarred doctor try to do plastic surgery on him to change his appearance with no anesthesia. That's how tough John was. He got his face all cut up in a bloody mess. You see that in other movies where they scream, where you see in movies where criminals are trying to change their appearance to hide. Well, John Dillinger actually did that. He invented that whole concept of changes his appearance. It just didn't work too well. No. Doctor was terrible, and it's hard to change your appearance. But he thought it worked, which also was part of what got him killed. He was under the impression that he was now invisible, but he got sold out, and that's what got him killed.
Wow. That's just...
Yeah, there's so much about him. We almost skipped over the plastic surgery and how he tried to change his appearance. And some of the movies, you'll see the big bloody operation scene with no anesthesia.
Wow, that must have been tough. Now, were his parents alive, or any of his family members around at the time?
Yeah, he had a big family. As we discussed earlier, his mom died when he was 3, which kind of set the course of his life. But his dad lived to a ripe old age. His dad went to his funeral. That became a big circus, a literal circus. Not only was it a circus, they had the funeral in Chicago, put his body on display, complete with everything you can imagine, selling snow cones and ice cream and all that. And then they put his body on display in a small town in Indiana where he lived, and people came from Indianapolis and everywhere to see him at the house. And that became a big circus with vendors and stuff. And his family, he had sisters, he had cousins, he has people to this day that are his relatives, and they're around. So yeah, he had a pretty big old South kind of farm family.
I was just
Except he didn't have many brothers and sisters because his mom died when he was 3.
Right. I was just going to say, how did it affect the family? Did Hoover go after any of his family members?
Yeah, Hoover, and another innovation in the creation of the FBI. In my book, John Dillinger, The Life and Death of America's First Celebrity Hero, the last chapter is all the innovations in law enforcement that were based on John Dillinger. It's a whole chapter, on and on and on. And yeah, Hoover did try to squeeze one of his cousins to find out where he was, that used that rule, harboring a fugitive. That's where the harboring a fugitive came in, because they're strong, and it was any relative, anywhere, any state. Now the FBI. It used to be a crook could escape the county where they committed their crime and hole up with anybody. After that, Hoover used the federal harboring a fugitive statute to try to arrest any woman, girlfriend, cousin, uncle, aunt that John Dillinger had dinner and slept at their house at. So he really squeezed them on that.
So Dillinger really made quite a few changes with law enforcement, really.
Oh, yeah, from the whole FBI. You talk about changes in law enforcement. Dillinger created the FBI, as The Simpsons said, invading our privacy for 70 years on a big sign. There would probably not be an FBI without John Dillinger. And the rules about crossing state lines, about cars, about FBI agents being able to carry weapons, about, again, there's just goes on and on and on about the bank insurance, the FCIC, or what is it when they insure bank accounts?
Yeah, that's
FDIC. Yeah, the law, the FCIC was based on John Dillinger. So if John Dillinger came and robbed your local bank, you wouldn't go broke, that the government would cover your debt. It's just on innovations. On the police department upgraded their guns from 6-shooters. They upgraded their cars. The police used to have little cheapy 4-cylinder cars, so they would upgrade them. Police got bulletproof vests because John Dillinger's gang wore them in the 1930s, and the police didn't have them. So the whole concept of the SWAT teams and their bulletproof vests and the shields, that all came out of John Dillinger and his machine guns, and he was wearing the shields because he had all the money. He could buy the most innovative tools, and the police couldn't. They were on a little tax budget. Go into a town, and there's Andy Griffin and Barney was who you're going to rob the Bank of Mayberry. And John Dillinger picked what he called easy jug banks that were small-town banks in wealthy little small towns, with Barney Fife from the Andy Griffin Show guarding it, and Goober being a deputy, and they just go in there and rob those banks easy. So they had to innovate. Well, police radios was another one. The police didn't even have radios in their car, And because John Dillinger was crossing county and state lines and had these long chases, they had to create police radios so police could radio ahead and make roadblocks and all that stuff that's normal today, all was to catch John Dillinger.
That's amazing. There's so much more to them than we realize.
Yeah, a whole chapter of law enforcement innovations. But how big can you get than creating the FBI?
Yeah.
that's the big one. They create a whole law enforcement juggernaut just to catch you.
Yeah. That's pretty good, except for you just don't live very long. That's
No. Yeah, well, he's the original, the expression, live fast, die young, and leave a pretty corpse came from John Dillinger. He lived fast, he died young, he left a pretty corpse that was on display in Chicago for 30,000 people to see. And that expression came out from there.
Well, there you go. I hope he was happy.
Hey, he had a short, happy life.
Well, yeah, it sounds like it. All the cars and everything you'd want, But
yeah.
Well, excellent conversation, and I loved hearing about your book, John Dillinger: The Life and Death of America's First Celebrity Criminal. And this is Dary Matera. Thank you very much for talking about the book.
Thank you, Alan.
The mission has been completed.
The end! By George, he's got it! It is the end! I'll say it.
This has been a production of the Z-Talk Radio Network.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.